The office on the 10th floor of one of the most modern buildings in Seattle perfectly reflected the personality of its owner. Emily Thompson, a clinical psychologist for 15 years, valued organization and minimalism. The walls in soft shades of beige were decorated only with her strategically positioned diplomas and a single abstract work of art that, according to her, helped her patients project their own interpretations during sessions. On that Tuesday afternoon, the Seattle sky displayed its characteristic gray autumn color. Emily adjusted her discreet framed glasses while consulting her digital schedule on her tablet. Her next patient was Jason Miller, a young executive she had been treating for about 6 months for issues related to anxiety and fear of death. Interesting, thought Emily, how people can develop so much fear of something as natural and inevitable as death. She had always approached the subject from a strictly scientific perspective, basing her therapeutic interventions on proven evidence and studies. For Emily, death was simply the end of biological functions, nothing more. The intercom buzzed softly. "Dr. Thompson, Mr. Jason Miller has arrived for his session," announced her secretary, Sarah. "Please send him in," replied Emily, rising to receive her patient. Jason entered the room with his usual worried expression. At 35, he was the typical successful professional living under constant pressure. He sat down in the beige leather armchair, adjusting his tie as he always did at the beginning of sessions. "How was your week, Jason?" asked Emily, assuming her characteristic professional posture. "Doctor, I had another one of those episodes," he began, his restless hands on his knees. "I was in an important meeting when suddenly I started feeling that tightness in my chest, as if..." Emily felt a sharp pain in her own chest as she listened to her patient. Initially, she tried to ignore the discomfort, keeping her attention focused on Jason, but the pain intensified rapidly, radiating to her left arm. "Doctor, is everything all right?" asked Jason, noticing that something was wrong. Emily tried to respond, but her voice failed. The pain became unbearable, and she realized she couldn't move. Her tablet slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. "Help! Someone, please!" shouted Jason, running to the office door. Sarah rushed into the room and, seeing her boss collapsing, immediately called for emergency services. The following minutes seemed to unfold in slow motion. Emily could hear distant voices, but she was rapidly losing consciousness. And then something extraordinary happened. Emily found herself floating above her own body. She observed with surprising clarity the paramedics who had just arrived applying the defibrillator to her lifeless chest. She could see Jason leaning against the wall, pale and frightened, while Sarah cried silently in a corner of the room. "No pulse." "Prepare for another discharge," shouted one of the paramedics. But Emily was no longer paying attention to the scene below. An intense and welcoming light began to envelop her, and she felt herself being pulled towards a tunnel of brilliant light. The sensation was indescribable, a deep peace and unconditional love that she had never experienced in her entire life. As she traversed the tunnel, all her scientific certainties, all her rationalist convictions began to dissolve. Reality as she knew it was about to be completely transformed. "Emily," a soft yet powerful voice called her. "Do not be afraid." Before her, emerging from the radiant light, was a figure she instantly recognized, though she had never seen before. It was Jesus Christ, not as portrayed in classic paintings, but as a presence of indescribable love and power. "My daughter," he said, "you have been chosen for a special mission. The time is being fulfilled, and the world needs to be warned." Emily, who had always doubted the existence of any spiritual reality, now found herself face to face with the very source of truth. Tears of joy and reverence ran down her spiritual face as she absorbed every word. "But why me?" she finally managed to ask. "Because you understand both the human mind and the skepticism of the modern world. Your journey of transformation will be a powerful testimony." Jesus then extended his hand, and Emily saw herself before a series of visions, future events that would unfold in the coming years. Each image was clear and yet enigmatic, like pieces of a puzzle she would need to decipher. "You will see these events manifest," he explained, Each will be a sign, a warning for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Emily tried to absorb every detail, every nuance of the visions unfolding before her. But before she could ask more questions, she felt herself being pulled back. "Your time has not yet come," said Jesus. "Go, back and fulfill your mission. I will be with you." The last thing Emily heard before returning was, "Remember, love is stronger than fear." Suddenly, an explosion of pain in her chest brought her back to physical reality. Her eyes opened, and she found herself surrounded by concerned faces. The paramedics looked relieved. "She's back!" exclaimed one of them. "It's a miracle!" Emily tried to speak, but she had an oxygen tube in her nose. Her last memories before losing consciousness again were of Sarah's tears of joy and Jason's perplexed look. Her life would never be the same again. The hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Emily opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the soft light coming through the window. It was already her third day of hospitalization, and each moment of consciousness brought with it the crystalline experience of her time in the beyond. Her younger sister Michelle slept uncomfortably in an armchair beside the bed. Emily smiled, touched by her sister's dedication, who hadn't left the hospital since receiving news of the heart attack. Michelle was a history teacher and, unlike Emily, had always maintained her Catholic faith, even when Emily provoked her with scientific arguments. "Michelle," Emily called softly. Michelle woke up startled. "Emily, how are you feeling?" "Better," replied Emily, adjusting herself in the bed. "But I need to tell you something important." Michelle approached, holding her sister's hand. Emily could see the concern in her brown eyes, so similar to her own. "Michelle, during the heart attack, I saw something that changed everything I've always believed." In the hours that followed, Emily shared every detail of her experience with her sister. She described the tunnel of light, the sensation of absolute peace, and, primarily, her encounter with Jesus and the visions she had received. Michelle listened attentively, her expressions alternating between astonishment and wonder. "Emily, this is extraordinary," said Michelle, after her sister finished her account. "But how did precisely you, who has always been so skeptical?" "I know," interrupted Emily with an ironic smile. "The irony doesn't escape me. The rationalist psychologist having a mystical experience." At that moment, Dr. Robert Johnson, the cardiologist responsible for her case, entered the room. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a gentle expression, carrying a clipboard with exams. "Dr. Thompson, how are you feeling today?" he asked, approaching the bed. "Physically, better, but mentally, I'm still processing a lot." Dr. Johnson nodded, consulting the exams. "Well, I have to say that your recovery is remarkable. To be frank, when you were admitted, we didn't expect, well, you were technically dead for 7 minutes. It's extraordinary that there are no neurological sequelae." "Doctor," Emily began, sitting up straighter in the bed, "I need to tell you what I experienced during those 7 minutes." The doctor looked at her with professional interest, and Emily repeated her story, this time with a more clinical focus, describing the sensations and perceptions with the precision of a mental health professional. "Interesting," commented Dr. Johnson when she finished. "You know, there are studies on near-death experiences, but usually the reports are more vague. Yours is extraordinarily detailed." "Doctor, I know how this sounds. Believe me, no one would be more skeptical than I myself a week ago. But what I experienced was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced." Dr. Johnson made some notes on his clipboard. "Well, from a medical point of view, your experience could be explained by chemical alterations in the brain during oxygen deprivation, but—" "But?" asked Emily, noticing his hesitation. "But in 30 years of cardiology, I've never seen a recovery like yours. The damage to your heart simply disappeared. It's as if the heart attack never happened." After the doctor left, Michelle turned to her sister with a thoughtful look. "Emily, what about the visions you had? You said they were about future events." Emily closed her eyes, trying to recover the details. "Yes, they were 6 specific events. The first was about a great spiritual illusion that would deceive many people. but the details aren't clear to me yet. It's as if I need to decipher each vision at the right moment. And you really believe you received a mission? Michelle: I don't just believe, I know. For the first time in my life, I have absolute certainty about something I can't scientifically prove. That night, alone in her hospital room, Emily began to make notes on her tablet. She recorded every detail she could remember of her experience, every nuance of the visions she had received. As she wrote, a sense of urgency grew in her chest. The world was about to change drastically, and she had been chosen to be a messenger. But how would a respected psychologist convince people of something that defied all logic and reason? Her thoughts were interrupted by a message on her cell phone. It was from Jason, her patient who was present during the heart attack. "Dr. Thompson, we need to talk. What happened that day? I saw something too." Emily sat up straight in bed, her heart racing. Apparently she wasn't the only one who had experienced something extraordinary that day. The morning after Jason's message, Emily was discharged from the hospital. Against medical recommendations for absolute rest, she scheduled a meeting with her patient at a quiet cafe near her home. The place, with its exposed brick walls and plants hanging from the ceiling, offered the necessary privacy for a delicate conversation. Jason was already waiting when she arrived, nervously spinning, his coffee cup on the saucer. Seeing her, he quickly stood up, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Dr. Thompson, I'm glad you're well," he said, pulling out a chair for her to sit. "I didn't know if I should contact you, but after what I saw—" "Jason," Emily gently interrupted. "First, at this moment, I'm not your therapist. We're two people who shared an extraordinary experience. Please tell me what you saw." Jason took a deep breath, looking around as if fearing being overheard. When you had the heart attack, something strange happened. For a moment, I saw an intense light envelop your body, and more than that, I saw, how can I say this, a kind of separation, as if there were two yous in the office." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Jason's description confirmed her own experience of having observed her body from above. "But there's more," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "At that moment, all my fear of death simply disappeared. It was as if I had received a deep understanding that death is not the end. It's just a passage." Tears began to form in Jason's eyes. "Dr. Thompson, I spent 6 months in therapy trying to deal with this phobia, and in an instant, it was as if I had received an answer that no rational explanation could give me." Emily reached across the table, touching Jason's arm in a gesture of understanding. "Jason, what happened that day was just the beginning," she said, deciding to share her own experience. For the next hour, Emily described in detail her encounter with Jesus and the visions she had received. Jason listened attentively, occasionally nodding as if her words confirmed something he already intuited. When she finished, a significant silence hung between them. "And now?" he finally asked. "What are you going to do with all this?" Emily took a sip of her chamomile tea, which was already cold. "I received a mission, Jason. I need to share these. Visions warn people about what's coming, but you fear the professional consequences," he completed, understanding her hesitation. "Exactly. As a mental health professional, I know exactly how this will be interpreted. Post-traumatic delusion, stress-induced dissociation, there are dozens of possible diagnoses." "Dr. Thompson," said Jason, leaning forward, "I've spent my entire life fearing death because I couldn't accept anything that couldn't be scientifically proven. But what happened that day in your office changed everything. Sometimes the deepest truth can't be measured or quantified." At that moment, Emily's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from her secretary. The State Board of Psychology had scheduled an extraordinary meeting to discuss her case. Apparently, someone had already raised concerns about her ability to continue practicing after the episode. "It's starting," murmured Emily, showing the message to Jason. "The first trial. What are you going to do?" Emily straightened in, her chair, a new determination in her gaze. "I'm going to face it. I can't deny what I experienced. It would be a betrayal not only to the mission I received, but to everything I've learned about authenticity, in years of clinical practice. As they said goodbye, Jason surprised Emily with a spontaneous hug. "Count on me," he said. "Whatever path you choose to follow." On the way home, Emily reflected on how her life had completely changed in just 1 week. The scientific certainties that had guided her before now seemed superficial in the face of the depth of what she had experienced. And yet, her analytical training hadn't abandoned her. She knew she would need to find a way to integrate these two apparently contradictory realities. Arriving at her apartment, Emily went straight to her office. On the walls, the diplomas and certificates that were once a source of so much pride now seemed to observe her with an air of judgment. She sat at her desk and began to write, preparing for the meeting with the board. But as she organized her thoughts, something strange began to happen. The words on her computer began to blur, and a strong headache hit her. Suddenly, images began to flash in her mind, fragments of the first vision she had received during her near-death experience. "The first sign is coming," she thought, trying to focus on the images forming in her mind. "The great spiritual illusion is about to begin." The auditorium of the State Board of Psychology was packed that Thursday morning. Emily could feel the curious and concerned looks from her professional colleagues as she walked to the central table, where 5 board members awaited her with serious expressions. Dr. Samantha Davis, president of the board and Emily's former mentor in college, was the first to speak. "Dr. Emily Thompson, this meeting was convened due to concerns expressed by some of your colleagues about your current condition to practice the profession. We understand that you went through a traumatic experience, but reports that you are sharing prophetic visions with patients have left us quite apprehensive." Emily observed the faces before her. She knew each of these professionals, had worked with some of them, respected them all. But now, for the first time, she felt like a stranger in her own environment. "Dr. Davis, colleagues," Emily began, her voice firm despite her nervousness. "I completely understand your concerns. If I were in your shoes, I would probably have the same ones. But what I experience goes beyond any conventional psychological or neurological explanation." As she spoke, Emily felt that familiar sensation again, the intense headache, followed by flashes of images in her mind. But this time, the visions were clearer, more defined. "In fact," she continued, her voice subtly changing, "what I'm about to share with you is just the beginning. The first vision is materializing right now." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Emily could see some colleagues exchanging concerned looks, others taking notes furiously. "Soon a charismatic figure will emerge," Emily proceeded, the words flowing as if dictated directly from her transcendental experience. "Someone who will unite science and spirituality in an apparently perfect way. Millions will be attracted to a message of spiritual elevation without commitment to absolute truths. It will be the great illusion, the first sign." "Dr. Thompson," interrupted one of the board members, Dr. Michael Roberts, "are you suggesting that you had a prophetic vision during your episode?" "I'm not suggesting, Dr. Roberts, I'm stating. And more than that, I can prove it. In the coming days, a global movement will begin. Someone named Gabriel Light will emerge in the media, presenting a new spiritual synthesis. His words will seem perfectly aligned with modern science, and even fervent skeptics will be attracted to his message." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could see the mixture of compassion and concern in her former mentor's eyes. "Dr. Thompson," Samantha said softly, "I understand that you sincerely believe in what you're saying, but as mental health professionals, we need to consider—" At that moment, the auditorium doors opened, and Sarah, Emily's secretary, rushed in, holding her tablet. "Excuse the interruption," she said, breathless, "but I thought everyone should see this." Sarah connected the tablet to the auditorium's projector. On the screen appeared a headline from one of the main news portals, "Gabriel Light, the Global Phenomenon that is revolutionizing modern spirituality." The article, published just 10 minutes ago, talked about an American quantum physics professor who was causing a stir on social media with his lectures on universal synthesis, a new approach that promised to unite science and spirituality. Anna observed the expressions of astonishment forming on the faces around her. "This is just the beginning," she said, standing up. In the coming months, we'll see this movement grow exponentially. But it's an illusion, a distraction from what really matters. How could you know this? Asked Dr. Robert, his voice trembling slightly. Because it was shown to me, Anna replied simply. Just as the other events that are to come were shown to me. You can suspend my license if you think it's necessary. You can doubt my sanity. But you can't deny what just happened here. Dr. Helen stood up slowly, her face a mask of confusion. This meeting is suspended, she announced. We need to process what happened here today. As those present began to disperse, many still looking stunned at the projector screen, Helen approached Anna. What's happening, Anna? She asked in a low voice. Really happening. Reality as we know it is about to change, Helen. And this is just the first step. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting at the Psychology Council. Anna watched the city from her apartment, the lights of Philadelphia twinkling under the starry night. Her living room had been transformed into a kind of makeshift headquarters, with people coming and going constantly. Mary was sitting on the couch, coordinating a WhatsApp group that already had more than 5,000 people, all who had had similar supernatural experiences in recent weeks. Philip, who was now temporarily living with a friend to avoid persecution, worked tirelessly on his laptop, trying to unravel more details about the Synapse Global App Code. The official announcement will be tomorrow, he said, without taking his eyes off the screen. Gabriel Light will present the Great Synchronism as the next step in the evolution of human consciousness. There are already more than 50 million pre-registrations for the app. Helen, who had surprisingly become a strong ally after having her own spiritual experience during a council session, added, and that's not all. They're promising it will be the largest simultaneous event in human history. All the major TV networks in the world will broadcast it. Anna felt that familiar pressure in her head, and new images began to emerge. The fifth vision was manifesting with frightening clarity. They're going to use cell phone towers, she said, her voice distant as the images formed. The app will emit a specific frequency that, amplified by the towers, will create a neural synchronization network on a global scale. But the true purpose is to erase individuality, completed a voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Mary's school principal, Dr. Claudia, who had just arrived. I had the same vision this morning. They want to create a collective consciousness that can be centrally controlled. How are we going to stop this? Asked Mary, the concern evident in her voice. We can't just turn off all the cell towers in the world. No, Anna replied, but we can offer an alternative. True spiritual connection, the one that comes from above, is more powerful than any human technology. Philip suddenly stood up, excited. Wait, I think I understood something in the code. They're using a specific frequency to create a kind of resonance with the limbic system of the brain. But if we can emit a counter-frequency... Prayer, interrupted Anna, another vision taking shape. Sincere prayer, when done in true spiritual union, generates a spiritual frequency that no technology can replicate or overpower. At that moment, Anna's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. When she answered, Gabriel Light's voice sounded from the other end. Dr. Anna, there's still time. Join us. You can have a prominent place in the new order that is emerging. Why resist the inevitable progress of humanity? Progress, Anna replied, putting the phone on speaker. You call the attempt to control people's minds and souls progress. Control? No, dear doctor. We are offering liberation. Liberation from the limitations of individuality, from the prisons of the ego, a truly unified consciousness. A falsification of God's true purpose for humanity, Anna retorted. Unity in diversity, not forced uniformity. Gabriel laughed softly. Always the religious one, aren't you? Well, tomorrow the world will see who's really in control. The great synchronism will happen, whether you want it or not. After the call ended, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Helen who broke it. What if we did our own event, something simultaneous to their synchronism? A global prayer movement, Mary whispered, her eyes shining. We can use the same social networks to mobilize people. But how are we going to compete with all the traditional media? Philip questioned. They have billions in resources, control over the main platforms. We don't need to compete, Anna said, a supernatural certainty taking hold of her. We just need to be faithful to what has been shown to us, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. She walked to the window, observing the city again. Somewhere down there, thousands of people were preparing for what they believed to be the next step in human evolution. Little did they know they were about to become part of a global-scale mind control experiment. Tomorrow, Anna continued, when the great synchronism begins, two spiritual forces will come into direct conflict. On one side, human technology trying to create a false unity. On the other, the power of the Holy Spirit manifesting true spiritual connection. And what will be the result? Someone asked. Anna closed her eyes, allowing the last part of the fifth vision to manifest. There will be a clash between these two forces, and the veil that separates the natural from the supernatural will be temporarily removed. For a brief moment, everyone will see spiritual reality as it truly is. And then, each person will have to make a choice. The group worked late into that night, preparing for the confrontation that was to come. Through social networks, thousands of prayer groups were organizing around the world. The battle for the soul of humanity was about to reach its climax. While the others finally retired to rest, Anna remained awake, praying. Tomorrow, the sixth and final vision would begin to be fulfilled, and with it would come the final revelation that would change everything. The day dawned differently in Philadelphia. Anna noticed this as soon as she opened her eyes. There was a density in the air, as if the atmosphere itself was charged with expectation. In a few hours, the great synchronism would begin. Her apartment was already full again. Philip monitored the activities of the Synapse Global app in real time, while Mary coordinated the prayer groups through social networks. Helen had managed to get a spot on the largest local TV channel to give an interview, warning about the dangers of the event. The app downloads have just passed 100 million, Philip announced, his voice tense. And that's just in the United States. Globally, we're talking about more than 2 billion people. Anna was observing the movement when she felt that familiar pressure in her head, more intense than ever. The last vision began to manifest, and with it came an understanding that made her stagger. My God, she whispered, leaning against the wall. Now I understand. The great synchronism is not the end, it's just the beginning. Everyone in the room stopped to listen to her. Gabriel Light. He's not the true mastermind behind all this. He's just a precursor. The real power behind Synapse Global is something much older and much more sinister. At that moment, all the electronic screens in the room, cell phones, laptops, the TV, began to display the same image, Gabriel Light's serene face. The time has come, humanity, his voice sounded hypnotic. The moment to transcend our individual limitations and truly become one. Open your apps, let yourselves connect. Be part of the new global consciousness. Anna could feel the energy changing in the air. Through the window, she saw people on the street stopping, taking their cell phones out of their pockets, their gazes becoming empty as the app's frequency began to pulse. It's starting, said Philip, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The frequency is being amplified by the cell towers. It's spreading. Mary ran to the window. Anna, look! In the sky, something extraordinary was happening. Dark clouds were forming in impossible patterns, spinning like a vortex over the city. Bluish lightning cut through the air, but without the sound of thunder. The prayer groups, said Helen, checking her cell phone. They're reporting supernatural manifestations all over the world. Lights in the sky, earthquakes. Anna closed her eyes, allowing the last vision to complete. When she opened them again, her voice sounded different, charged with divine authority. The veil is about to be torn. For 7 minutes, at the same time I was dead, the spiritual world and the physical world will touch. Everyone will see reality as it truly is. As if responding to her words, a wave of invisible energy swept through. The city, The lights flickered and failed. And then it happened. The veil separating the dimensions was torn. Suddenly everyone could see. Angelic beings in battle against forces of darkness in the skies. The true form of the unified consciousness that Synapse Global offered, an amorphous mass of negative energy trying to engulf human souls. And hovering above it all, an ancient evil presence much more terrible than anything Gabriel Light represented. In the streets, people fell to their knees. Some cried, others screamed. The app on their cell phones emitted a sinister buzz, trying to keep them connected to the false union. "It's the Antichrist," Anna said, her voice trembling. "He's using technology to prepare humanity to accept his mark." But something else was happening. From the prayer groups scattered around the world, a different light began to emanate. It was as if millions of small flames were lit simultaneously, forming a network of pure light that countered the technological darkness. In the center of her apartment, Anna began to pray. Her voice, though soft, seemed to carry the power of 1,000 thunders. "In the name of Jesus Christ, the veil that blinds has been removed. May all see and choose." An explosion of celestial light cut through the skies. The buzz of cell phones abruptly ceased. For 7 minutes, exact 7 minutes, the entire humanity saw spiritual reality unfiltered. When it was all over, when the veil returned to its place, the world was different. Millions of people had deleted the Synapse Global app, consciously choosing to reject the false unity. Gabriel Light had mysteriously disappeared. TV networks showed scenes of crowds praying in the streets, of people hugging and crying, of a genuine spiritual awakening that no technology could fabricate. Anna looked at her friends gathered in her apartment. Everyone had seen. Everyone now knew. "And now?" asked Mary, her voice choked with emotion. "Now," Anna replied, "the real battle begins. What we saw today was just the prelude. The Antichrist will try again, in other ways, with other disguises. But now there are millions of people who have seen the truth with their own eyes, people who can no longer be deceived." Philip, who had recovered his job after the exposure of Synapse Global, smiled. "And we'll be here to continue warning." "Yes," Anna agreed, looking out the window at the sky returning to normal, "because this is our mission, not just mine, but of all who chose to see beyond the veil, to witness the truth, no matter the cost." As the sun set in Philadelphia, Anna knew that a new phase was beginning. The final confrontation was yet to come, but now there was hope, a hope grounded not in technology or human promises, but in the eternal truth that no algorithm could replicate. The call of eternity continued, and those who had chosen to listen were ready for what would come next.